gathered here with my family, my neighbors and my friends, standing firm together against oppression, holding hands. It doesn't matter where you're from, or if you're young or woman or man, we're here for the same reason. We want to take back our land. Oh God, thank you for giving us the strength to hold on. And now we're here together, calling you for freedom. Freedom, we know you can hear our call. Oh, we're calling for freedom, fighting for freedom. We know you won't let us fall. We know you're here with us. No more being prisoners in our homes. No more being afraid to talk. Our dream is just to be free, just to be free. Now when we've taken our first step towards a life of complete freedom, we can see our dream getting closer and closer. We're almost there. Oh God, thank you for giving us the strength.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good evening and welcome back to the Special Focus. My name is Zahid Jadwat, and as you've just heard, President Cyril Ramaphosa having delivered his address to the nation, updating the country and the nation on developments in South Africa's risk-adjusted strategy to deal with COVID-19. Quite a positive note and a positive message coming from the President this evening, and he is reiterating that although we have made remarkable progress, rather, a number of people are getting infected and losing their lives currently. Our most important task is now to ensure that we do not experience a new surge of infections. That's something which we all need to keep in mind at this stage when we get this positive and encouraging news from the President this evening. So some of the big news coming out from this address this evening, South Africa will move to alert level 1 of the risk-adjusted strategy to combat COVID-19. That takes effect as of Sunday, the 20th of September 2020. And President Ramaphosa saying this follows consultations with various stakeholders. And part of the benefits of this move to level 1, we will get into the details shortly, but just if I could give it to you in a nutshell, the curfew remains, and it will just the time is changed. It will start at midnight and end at 4 a.m. President Ramaphosa also saying that the country is ready to open our doors to the world. International business and leisure travel will be allowed as of the 1st of October 2020. So that's what we had this evening coming from the President. And now to join us for more analysis on this, we are joined by Mr. Jamira Mohopa, who is a socio-political commentator at Politics South Africa. And we are also going to be joined on the line by Professor Andre Duvenacher of the Northwest University. But let's welcome Jamira Mohopa this evening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, Zahid. Thank you very much for having me tonight.
Indeed, it is a pleasure having you on the show. So first things first, your thoughts on the President's address this evening?
My thoughts, I think it's generally it's a good idea for us to restrict as much restrictions as possible. So going to restriction level 1 is good news, especially for industry and especially for a lot of companies that have been struggling during the last 6 months. However, I do have a few concerns about some of the restrictions. For example, the curfew. I think that the curfew being implemented was based on the rationale that not having a curfew increases the chances of road accidents. People's behaviors were not doing well in terms of helping us deal with the pandemic. And so the rationale of having a curfew to reduce hospital strain was valid. But now that we have a high recovery rate and we actually have the hospital space, I do not see the need for us to restrict, for example, industries that operate at night to continue operating beyond 12 a.m. But apart from the curfew, I think that it's good also that they have reduced the restrictions in terms of capacity by saying that 50% of people who can occupy a particular venue can occupy the venue. Of course, I know there's indoor restrictions in terms of numbers and outdoor restrictions in terms of numbers. I think that's something that should have done from the beginning. However, it's a step also in the right direction in terms of economic recovery of this country.
Indeed, and also the international travel will be unbanned as of the 1st of October as we move to level one. That means that the people may go for leisure and business travel, quite a relief for the tourism industry.
Absolutely. It's good news. I know that other countries have done this, like they've preempted the acceptance of tourism, and it's a good move for us to actually start doing it. But one thing that we should do as a country is we should try to make it as seamless as possible. I recognize that the president will require a COVID-19 test to be provided that's done 72 hours before. If government can find a way to easily streamline that process, that it makes it less difficult for a person to transfer that information. If you can find a sort of like integrated way of connecting information within the different countries, I think that will be beneficial for us, because the last thing you need is you need to make it more difficult for tourists. And because the easier it is for tourists to come into the country, the better it will be for us.
Indeed, and just speaking about some of the what came out from the address by President Ramaphosa this evening, he spoke about improving contact tracing, increased testing capacity, and of course, quite happy about the COVID-19 Alert mobile app, something he could not stress enough. To encourage people to download and to get notifications when they do come into contact with people with COVID-19. So I think looking at those are positive steps, and it seems as though uh, our government having been doing something positive for the country. Your thoughts on his leadership during this pandemic? I remember we did have this conversation a few months ago regarding the leadership during the pandemic. Just your thoughts once again on this matter.
Okay, my thoughts have always been that I recognize the dangers of COVID-19, and we all can understand that COVID-19 is something, it's not just a flu. So the measures that are put in place are necessary. However, the extent to which those measures are put in place have always been a concern for me. I can see it even now, like as I mentioned earlier, the idea of still having a curfew. I think that our government really need to apply these regulations based on our situation and on our state of affairs. Looking at our high recovery rate, do we still need to have restrictions on the sale of alcohol, for example? Do we still need to restrict the number of hours that people can purchase alcohol? All of this is unfortunately a strain on a already limping economy of South Africa. We have already seen a decline of negative, or rather a decline of 51% in our GDP. These are red flags. We are already seeing an increase in unemployment. These are red flags. And I think that the restrictions, they are necessary. However, the level of the impact and the scale of these restrictions need to speak to the numbers that we're seeing. They need to speak to the recovery rates. They need to speak to the number of deaths. If you look at France, for example, France has about 2 times the number of deaths that we do. They have a much lower recovery rate of less than 50%. Having such restrictions under the conditions of France, for example, would make sense. But for us, I think our president is being too safe, um, and he is not allowing the economy to get back into gear as desperately as it needs to be back into gear.
All right, let me welcome also to this discussion Professor Andre Duvenacher, who is a political scientist and professor at the Northwest University. He joins us on the line now. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Professor. Professor Andre Duvenacher? Okay, it seems we've been having some trouble connecting with Professor Andre Duvenacher this evening. We are speaking about President Cyril Ramaphosa's address this evening, and we are getting reaction to that. Currently, we do have Mr. Jamil Ramahopa, who is a socio-economic commentator at Politics South Africa. So, Mr. Ramahopa, we were speaking about the leadership of President Cyril Ramaphosa and some of the restrictions. I think you're not too happy that some of these restrictions are still in place, owing to the current situation that we are in with COVID-19. And then also President Ramaphosa having said that over 8,000 companies benefited from the UIF wage support package, and the UIF benefit has been extended until the end of the national state of disaster, which ends next month.
Mhm. Absolutely. The UIF has come as help for many companies, but we must also recognize the fact that the money coming from UIF is not a full salary. At most, I think it's 30% and 17,000 Rand maximum, if I'm not mistaken. So a lot of people cannot live on UIF, and a lot of families, even though they do receive money from UIF, are struggling. People are falling behind in terms of their debt repayments. People are falling behind in terms of their commitments. We've seen that private schools are struggling financially. So, what this tells us is that the middle class in this country is struggling. So, you can only imagine how the working class and the lower class in this country is struggling when the middle class, who can actually afford private schooling, is struggling. So, I think I think we it just goes back to the understanding. I think our government is operating on a typical tick box exercise type of approach, where as long as they have done what is seen as necessary by the World Health Organization, it therefore means that they're actually doing a good job. But if you go to the ground and you go onto the ground level, and you start analyzing the situation from a long-term perspective, then you'd actually realize that they're not actually doing a really good job. Because when you talk about saving lives, the rationale behind all of this is about saving lives. But then when we talk about saving lives, we need to ask ourselves that holistically, are we saving lives on a short term basis, or are we saving lives on a long term basis? And if we look at the lives that we're actually losing on a long term basis by losing out on tax revenue collection, which is money that will benefit and save lives in the future, if we look at that in the long term, I think that we're not doing a good enough job. And this is something that really our leadership from the top all the way to the bottom need to start thinking about really carefully and clearly.
Yeah, you speak about this discrepancy between what the government is doing, the leadership at the top, and then what is actually going on at the ground level. And I think those are some of the concerns which have been raised time and time again all through this lockdown. Where do you think government is falling short in terms of delivering what they're actually saying and actually meeting, making it turn into reality on the ground to affect people's lives?
Mm. So I think it's logic. I know I'm putting it rather plainly, but I think what our government is lacking is logic. Um, I think they're failing in terms of applying themselves. They are applying a rule book which is set by the World Health Organization, which are guidelines. And what they fail to do is to take those guidelines and unpack them and make them applicable to South Africa. I don't think that the guidelines from the World Health Organization can apply to each and every country the same way, because all countries are different and all countries have different situations. Perhaps a more strict regulation could apply in a country like the United States of America, for example. It could apply to France, for example. But looking at South Africa and looking at the conditions of South Africa and looking at the desperate conditions situation of South Africa, I think our government is failing to put into practice and into application the relevant parts of the guidelines stipulated by the World Health Organization. And that speaks to the quality of leadership that we have, the quality of leadership that's unable to translate guidelines into something meaningful for the country. Because it's not just about saving immediate lives, it's about having a sustainable solution that will carry us on going forward post COVID 19. And looking at the rating agencies, the information from the rating agencies aren't going to all of a sudden disappear. We're still going to be under junk status. And post COVID 19, we are still going to still need some form of investment to stimulate the economy and to get people working again. However, if we are already starting on a lower base than what we were pre COVID 19, it's not going to look good for us. And that's where government needs to start applying themselves a little bit more and start putting a little bit more nuance and a little bit more thought in the application of the guidelines in such a way that it's best appropriate for South Africa.
And one example that actually comes to mind when we speak about when we speak about this discrepancy between what the leadership is saying and what is actually happening on the ground. President Ramaphosa also saying that the healthcare system will continue being maintained, but it's no secret that the healthcare system is in serious trouble at the moment. Before even the COVID-19 pandemic, if we walk into our hospitals, it's clearly demonstrated there. But just something else which the president spoke about and he touched on this evening was gender-based violence, and he has noted that gender-based violence having increased during the lockdown period. He says government has identified 30 hotspots across the country, and this is where much more attention will be focused.
Mhm. Absolutely. The issue of gender-based violence also speaks to our justice system and the shortcomings thereof. Our problem with gender-based violence is based on the reality that the chances of a person being arrested, convicted, and put behind bars for a justifiable number of time is low. We do understand also that a lot of these cases disappear or never go far enough to set a strong enough example. So, and this is a big problem. I don't think what Ramaphosa was saying in the previous months about um, denying bail for people who are accused of who have committed rape or that, I don't think that on its own is good enough. I think people
Mm.
continue to rape and people continue to abuse women because they know that the chances of them getting away with it are high. And this is something
Mm.
that speaks to the strength of our justice system, the strength of our police, and the strength of our ability to investigate and gather enough evidence that will stand valid in the court of law. So President Ramaphosa touched on that a bit by talking about strengthening the justice system and strengthening the different departments, and that's very important. It is very important. It's more important than actually arresting people because you need to have the right infrastructure in place first, so that when a person appears in court, you are then able to guarantee that you will have sufficient evidence to put them behind bars for a reasonable amount of time.
Indeed, so much more that we could speak about, but unfortunately, that's where we are going to have to leave it for tonight. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Jamil Mohopa, socio-economic commentator at Politics South Africa.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And that's where we are going to have to leave our reaction to President Cyril Ramaphosa's address this evening. Of course, some positive news coming out from the presidential address. The country will move to alert level 1 of South Africa's risk-adjusted strategy to combat COVID-19 as of Sunday, the 20th of September 2020. That's an interesting and encouraging move and development in our management of COVID-19. But from myself, Zahid, Jadwat, and the team, thank you so much for tuning in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.